We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck your little credit card scam and jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga, please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose of it, close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
It is time. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Live here, Sunday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Live right now. So, throughout the show, we'll accept people calling in. 718-717-8296. 717-8296. Chris J here, Voice of Rebellion Radio. Tonight we are talking about Zionism and Bolshevism. I know it's pretty much a continuation in some ways. We're comparing Titoism and Bolshevikism last time we were on. And this time I'm going to go more in depth into the Bolshevik revolution and what that exactly was all about. And, breaking down what exactly went wrong in the Soviet Union that I think will, I see a lot of, again, is that ultimately when talking about the Soviet Union, I see a lot of people forgetting the major part of the equation that made the Soviet Union turn the way it was. Because ultimately, it's not it wasn't the system of socialism itself or communism. It was ultimately something different, and it was a very familiar thing to nowadays that it's cancer to this world. And I don't regret saying that it's a cancer in all means. Is that ultimately when people start bringing up, it's whatever you call it, is that multiple people call it Zionism, they call it the Khazars, they call it the Tel Aviv gang, whatever you want to call it, is that ultimately this conspiracy that has been manifesting itself in the last 100 or so years. I think we can all concur, mainly here in the alternative media for the most part, that Zionism has been destructive to Palestine, destructive to the Middle East, and, where it starts the line starts to get blurred. Some people don't want to go into saying it's a global problem, but it is a global problem. Zionism is a global infection that is manifested itself in multiple different countries. A lot of times the liberals will try to tell you that the gun control, they try to push for gun control. They'll try to tell you that the NRA is the biggest lobby in America. And then on the flip side, the Republicans will probably try to tell you that multiple different ones. I would say they might try to tell you Planned Parenthood, which is a nefarious organization itself, but just like the NRA, they're both nefarious organizations, but they're definitely not the biggest lobbying organization in America. The biggest lobbying organization in America is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, otherwise known as AIPAC, which is pretty much has helped set the stage for our foreign policy, for our it seems to be unilateral support toward the state of Israel, no matter what they do, no matter what war crimes they commit, no matter what they do to the Gazan people and what they do to the people of the West Bank and other Palestinian territories, where right now we've had, we're having $8 million a day going over, no, it's $15 million a day going to Israel. We have upwards of $5 billion a year going to Israel, plus all the bonus packages that are pretty much, not for any rewards of them actually doing democratic reforms to their government. We're actually trying to work towards improved human rights for all people inside of Israel, Palestine. But this is just for them being them. And ultimately, we're doing this special relationship with Israel, which is really sinking us as the American people. It's one of the major problems, one of the major things that faces us in today's world is the Israeli-Palestine, how America's dealing with the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And it's really a disaster. And ultimately, you think that the president that said America first, Donald Trump, Donald Trump said that he would, he seemed to kind of hint that maybe these kind of relationships like what we have with the Saudis and what we have with Israel would be phased out when he became president. But it's just a continuation is what we're seeing of these disastrous trade deals, these disastrous relationships that we've seen now. What I really hope to see, and what I've seen is that there's definitely seems to be more consciousness, more awareness of what exactly we've gotten ourselves involved in around the world. And hopefully, eventually, a new government that finally realizes and tries to repel this cancer that is Zionist Israel of today and Zionism as a whole. And it's not just Israel, really. When it comes to Zionism, it's further than that. It's a ideology that the elites subscribe to. And part of it is the homeland of Israel, but it also seems to be a you could say it's the political ideology of the New World Order, along with fascism. It's a different, ultimately, people will say, well, those are two conflicting things. And the Nazis, they killed a bunch of the Jews in Germany, but when you come to a realization is that ultimately the same bankers that support Israel supported Nazi Germany. The bankers, these people, these top Zionists, do not give a shit about the average Jewish person, about the average Jewish family. And then ultimately, you have to realize that that's why I don't really that's why I try very hard and explain multiple times during the show is that I do not have any hatred, any prejudices against Jewish people, but I do have hate's a strong word, but I would say yes, I do abhor the existence of the New World Order and the Zionist government of Israel and the different governments that play ball with the New World Order, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and ultimately this the Tel Aviv gang. There's a song, I believe, actually, by Payday Monsanto, which is he's a pretty controversial alternative media rapper that you might have heard of. He's I used to play his music on my intros and outros for the first 5 weeks or so when I was here at UCY. I used to play more at Stable Radio, but Payday Monsanto is known for his opposition towards Israel, and one of his songs, I believe, is Tel Aviv Steve. Yeah, pretty much it's kind of like Tel Aviv gang and talking about mentality of Israel, the mentality of the Zionists and the Zionist government. When it comes to Arabs, they believe them to be subhuman, to be like animals. These absolutely repugnant words that come out of these top Zionist leaders, and a lot of times like top Zionist rabbis' mouths. Which if it was to come out of anybody else, it seems like if it was when it comes to like these sound like Hitlerian quotes, and ultimately these are coming out of the Zionists. It's disgusting. And this is something that, when you realize what they've been involved in, and you realize, it's like what the Rothschilds have been involved in. They've been involved in the funding of the Nazis. They've been in the Federal Reserve, 9/11, JFK assassination. They've been involved in, yes, even the one that took me a while to wake up to, but I finally realized was the Bolshevik Revolution. People like Jacob Schiff, who helped funded the Bolsheviks and the taking down of the Tsar of Russia, and ultimately the old Russia was toppled. And nowadays we're finally seeing like the old Russia coming back through the Putin Russia and the new Russia, which Vladimir Putin has been you see all the hatred towards him in the media, all this scare, really how they've been trying to scare people of Mr. Putin, trying to say that, he's going to try to take over the West. He's going to, he's rebuilding the Soviet Union, which is the furthest thing from the truth. And I'll tell you one thing. Who are the ones that are trying, are talking about building the wall on their southern border, talking about, we have the NSA surveilling in a mass scale on citizens. Also, has a cult of personality around its government's officials, whether it's the people that are on the left, it's all the left-right paradigm, it's all the same shit, it's all Wall Street when you really break it down. But Donald Trump, the cult of personality there, and a cult of personality around, people like Bernie Sanders. So ultimately, the cult of personalities there, like was around the Soviet leaders, it's the same crap. It's rebranded. And, I would say, I'm not going to say the entire Soviet, history in the Soviet, everything that the Soviets did was bad. There was, of course, it's like the toppling the Nazis was definitely beneficial to humanity because the Nazis were ultimately another Wall Street party and all their Wall Street organization entity that was toppled. However, they were toppled by the Russians. They were also ultimately, at the end, Stalin was one of their assets. And I believe that I believe that the Bolsheviks as a whole were a group that was funded by the West in order to topple a regime that they believed was getting too much power that would counter the British and traditional Western Europe powers. And they also took out the Germans at the same time, in my personal opinion. Actually, the Kaiser helped eliminate the other. The Germans and the Russians were at war. It was World War I. But the Kaiser talked about, I think in 1922, how he regretted doing that and regretted helping the Bolsheviks take over Russia. In 1922, I believe he said a quote about that. So the Bolsheviks, would end up toppling Russia, and in the end, he would have a kind of a similar thing. Ultimately, what happened in Nazi Germany was ultimately an end result to the Kaiser getting toppled, because when the Kaiser got toppled, it was pretty much a free-for-all for power of Germany. So you had the different groups. You had the communists, you had the, I believe you had like the liberal Democrats, and then you had the fascists, the Nazis. The Nazis eventually won that power struggle. I mean, the Weimar Republic was really just like a vacuum era. Is that, yes, there was a government there, but there was no real government. And then finally the Nazis, 1933, take over. I mean, yeah, it was a government, but it was weak. So Nazis eventually take over in 1933. So ultimately, the toppling the Kaiser led to the Nazis coming to power. When people understood that, ultimately that our actions in World War I talk about our actions, the Americans' actions, the United States government's actions in World War I led to the Nazis coming up for World War II and leading to the most bloody war in world history. The Bolsheviks, whole role is that they eventually, they took power and they set the stage for the being on the flip side of that war, the fascists versus the communists, and also is that the plan that Russia had prior to that probably wouldn't have been beneficial to the New World Order. And, I don't agree with everything the Tsar did. However, he did maintain Russia's identity. And at least they were Christian Russia prior to that point. Then they lost their Christian identity. And ultimately the Bolsheviks suppressed religion. And also another thing is that prior to that, the Bolsheviks did not have the Russian government was not as widespread in scope, I don't think, as the Bolsheviks were able to make it eventually with the Soviet Union. That actually there was a bigger government with Stalin than there was with the Tsar. At least, I'm just quoting really Solzhenitsyn here, which again I'm gonna say it's kind of dubious because he was pretty he was pretty biased. I would not say that Solzhenitsyn was the gold standard of unbiased quotes when it comes to what happened in Russia during the 1920s and 1930s. But Solzhenitsyn, for example, I don't really trust his numbers of 66 million killed under Joseph Stalin, but I do But I do agree with a lot of the stuff he said about the what happened to a lot of the dissidents when it came to when it came to the Soviet Union, the fact of the Gulag Archipelago. Damn, I can't. It's a word I always trip up on. But get my point is that when he talked about the gulags and that kind of thing, I could trust that, but I don't really trust some of the numbers, some of the things that might have been exaggerations, because again, I've seen different numbers, over time. People say 100 million, some people say 80 million. I think we have to be realistic, considering that they lost 30 million in the war. If you top 100 million on top of that, that's saying 130 million out of what? It's more than half their population. It's impossible. It's not. It couldn't have happened. That would definitely have been noticed more. The Soviet Union did bounce back pretty well from all those losses in the 1930s and 1940s. But I think 30 million is about a more realistic number, which is still a gigantic crime against humanity that they did. And also what they did, one of their biggest losses was not a person, but was a collective loss, and it was their culture. It was who they were. Soviet Union Russia lost their identity, and they even changed the name of the country to the Soviet Union. And then ultimately it would take them all the way to 2000, really, for them to gain back that Christian identity that they had prior to that, and an identity that was truly Russian. That they celebrated not really Russian history during the Soviet years, but they celebrated socialist history, communist history, I guess you could say. But it wasn't even truly communist history. It's that they claimed to have been communist, they claimed to have been socialist, but what they believed in, or what the country ultimately became, was a red oligarchy. And no really different than Western countries when it came to how the money was distributed, and the lives of the working class. And, it's not just me saying this. This is also other socialists, other people definitely said that. And people say, oh, well, that's Trotsky said that as well. I don't like Trotsky. I'll make that clear. Trotsky was one of them. Trotsky ultimately was killed by an internal party strife. However, Trotsky had his criticisms of the Soviet Union. My criticisms are more based on, I guess you could say, more like Gaddafi's criticisms of the Soviet Union, when he talked about how it was godless and how the country it wouldn't fit the Arabs' wishes. They've been talking about the different model, what model Libya was going to follow, whether it was going to follow a Western model or it was going to follow an Eastern model. Gaddafi chose no. We're going to choose the Arab socialist model. And it was loosely based on the Baasism that I had a show on last year about, actually, talking about the Arab socialism and people like Aflaq and many of the different pioneers of that movement, that they were going to create. He was going to make his own thing there, and he made the Jamahiriya, and is that ultimately the people had a lot of actually input when it came to that government, which they did not have in the Soviet Union. You had these bureaucrats that ultimately controlled the country, the bureaucrats that ultimately what they said went. It's really a shame that, and of course I could see why, is that our textbooks don't tell you the whole story about internal strife inside of the socialist movement as a whole throughout the 20th century, talking about the differences between Arab and Bolshevik socialism. And ultimately, it's really, when you look at the differences and you look at how they compounded, really, it's like totally different systems. And, like compared to like what Hafez al-Assad had in Syria, that nowadays Syria has, is that Syria is not a Bolshevik communist country. Neither is, like, Iran's a hybrid between, I guess, socialism and capitalism, but the socialism that it has is not Bolshevikism. One of the major things that happened under Bolshevikism, and I don't know how true this is, but I saw that. I know that this part. I know that they made anti-Semitism against the law, but I believe they might have made it punishable by death, which it just makes me wonder, is that why were they? Why were Jewish people protected so heavily in the Soviet Union compared to other ethnicities that also lived there, Asians, people of Arab descent that lived in the southern regions of Russia. But, ultimately, it kind of makes sense. And it was because there was, if what I think happened, and what has even Putin said, 85% of the first Soviet Union government was Jewish, is that they were trying to protect people at the top and ultimately the project, which was kind of like a predecessor to Zionism. And it's funny, 1917 was the year that the Bolshevik Revolution happened. Also, was the year that the Balfour Declaration happened, which it was discussing. I saw that I saw like pro-Israel sites celebrating the Balfour Declaration, which the Balfour Declaration is definitely nothing they should be celebrating. It's literally the handover of the Palestinians' land to the Rothschilds in 1917, and it was pretty much the predecessor to the State of Israel. Ultimately, when Britain took that land and gave it to the Zionists in 1947, it was, before that, it was Ottoman land. And that's, when you look at the World I, you see one more reason why World I was actually fought. It was actually about the land of Palestine partially, and stabilizing the Ottoman Empire, stabilizing the German Empire. I also believe with stabilizing the Russian Empire, is that it did not fit their vision for the new order, which was, the Russian Empire, German Empire had to go, and they're going to redraw up Europe. Then ultimately, you have the Tsar. He fell out of power, and it led to the horrible era that would next 74 years that the Bolsheviks would reign. And 30 million probably died under Stalin. It could have been upwards of 50 might have died throughout the entire Soviet Union. So I think that there was a sharp drop after Stalin and the brutality of the regime. I think Khrushchev, talking about Khrushchev, I think he might have been the exception to all the Soviet leaders. That I think when Khrushchev got the power, he was somebody who had witnessed the horrors of war himself, much like JFK. He was somebody that did not seem to be very confrontational, and he actually showed restraint during the Cuban Missile Crisis, much like JFK. I think that JFK and Khrushchev might have been both working towards a peace agreement, and that's why they were taken out. Both leaders were taken out. That's the weird thing, is that JFK was killed by assassination. Khrushchev was taken out by, pretty much in party disgrace. Like they said that he was weak over in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet hardliners, much like we had like the CIA, the hardliners of the Cold War over here, took out, assassinated JFK. So both leaders were taken out within like a few months of each other and replaced by hardliners themselves, LBJ over here and Leonid Brezhnev over there. And also, it was also a weird thing when you think about it, is that both would be leaders that they would not live very long afterwards. It's like LBJ was old and he died only a couple years after his presidency. Well, Brezhnev would last till 82, but he was in poor health for a lot of it. They picked ultimately the difference is Khrushchev wasn't exactly, wasn't exactly super young when he came into the premiership in 1952 or 53. However, Khrushchev had probably a bit of youthful energy compared to, like Leonid Brezhnev just seemed to be barely there. He was more of a figurehead, really, for the people that ultimately were in control of the Soviet Union during those years. And one of my biggest gripes with Leonid Brezhnev would be the fact of what he allowed for the fate Che Guevara to be, and the fact that he allowed Che Guevara to die in the woods of Bolivia, ultimately where he was captured with the help of ex-Nazi Klaus Barbie in the CIA. And ultimately he told the Communist Party of Bolivia to not support Che Guevara. And part of that was because Che Guevara did not support the Soviet Union. I think Che Guevara was wise and knew that the Soviet Union was no good. And that's why and that's why he did not support him. He did not support the Soviet Union. I don't think he really supported any like major imperial power at the time. Why would he? Is that ultimately he believed in a sovereign Cuba. He believed in sovereignty for the third world nations. And, it was really Che Guevara that kind of cemented Cuba's ambiguous status that they had throughout the Cold War, which is not quite a Soviet puppet like some of the other Cold War allies that they had, but it was more of a semi-independent. They wanted, I think Che Guevara, if he had it his way, it would have been a non-aligned nation with the help of countries like Yugoslavia, Indonesia, India, who India was also, talk about them is that they were a strong critic of the arms race that was going on in the world, in the 1950s and 1960s. We had this massive arms race, and, Eisenhower, JFK, LBJ, JFK, not himself, but the people around JFK, they were trying to put more and more nuclear weapons into the United States arsenal and pushing us closer and closer to Cold War. Is that to nuclear war? Nuclear war, I think, might not be the ultimate goal of the elites, and ultimately what they like is the arms race, and they like people taking more and more loans, countries taking more and more loans for this buildup, and getting closer and closer towards war. They probably want a conventional war that can make a shit ton of money off of. Nuclear war may not so much, because then it annihilates everybody, and they can't make money off of people that are dead. I know it sounds pretty crude, but it's the reality. The bankers don't have really a sense of humanity. They don't have a sense of guilt. These people are cold creatures that are just, thinking about power. And ultimately what the New World Order is, and you think about it, it's the ultimate amount of power. It's that ultimately controlling the planet where the entire world is a safe haven for them and their buddies. But ultimately it's up to what the thing we can do. The thing we can do as average people is that we can raise awareness of who these people are, who these people that are behind our government. Because a lot of people, I still see people blaming Trump or they blame Obama. It's like Obama or Soros. It seems like it's either Trump or Soros, and then ultimately like the people, the Democrats that blame Trump for everything, they think like the Russians are behind it, which is the silliest shit I've ever heard. That the Russians are supposedly behind Trump, and there's now this whole drama that's being played out between Trump Jr. and the Trump Jr. scandal that supposedly he met a Russian lawyer that had dirt on Hillary. I'll tell you one thing, is that I'm sure that there's connections that Trump has with Russia, but it's probably with the Russian mafia and not Vladimir Putin. And despite what the media will try to tell you over here, the Russian mafia is not connected to Vladimir Putin. In fact, Vladimir Putin's been a major sword in the side for Vladimir Putin for the last 17 years, the Russian mafia. And the Russian mafia is pretty much using control of the country in the 90s. They're the oligarchs who he's been thrown in jail. Even Kordosky, who threw in jail, but he released him now. And you know who Kordosky has a partnership in London with? The Rothschilds. And people try to tell you that the Rothschilds are a small player in this whole game, but you just have to trace the steps and you realize that they are at the top. They're the most powerful family in the West, and they control pretty much every bank in the West and almost every bank in the world. The Rothschilds, they've been behind most of the awful major events you can think of in the 20th century. And, there's a certain point, it's like one of those things where people, it's like people misquote, people will say later, it's like, oh, he said the Jews are behind every bad event in the 20th century. And I say, no, the Rothschilds were behind pretty much every bad event in the 20th century, major bad event. You think about like the Nazis coming up, JFK assassination, the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, the big stuff. But people will probably later, they'll quote, and I just put this out there. So, it's like, maybe with an extended dialogue on how, that's not what I said, maybe people will actually remember. It's like, no. He went on and explained that's not what he was saying. Because nowadays you got to be so fucking careful with this extended catering towards the politically correct community. It's not even towards the minorities that are supposedly affected, because a lot of times the minorities aren't even offended by what you're saying. It's people that are not even, it's like white people that are in front of their computer. It's like, oh, you said that the Rothschilds. That's code for Jews. No, it's not. It's not fucking code for Jews. It's that ultimately, it's like, okay, it's like I talk about the Rothschilds, I talk about the Rockefellers and everything like that, and I talk quite a bit, and I've actually, I've had ultimately like my kind of debates with other people that had, the kind of generalized, and I tell them that's not what I believe. I don't believe that Jews as a whole are responsible. I believe there's a lot of Jews that are opposed to this whole thing. They're just regular people like me and you. It's not a whole group of people's fault, but ultimately it's Khazars. When it comes to one thing, I would say is that if you want to point the closest thing to that would be the Khazars, people that moved from Europe, who were converted around the year 800, and they moved in droves in 1947 when Israel became a state. And, I'm not even going to say that all European Jews are responsible. But I'll say with the Zionists, and that's what I've said for 4 years now, people that have followed me online for a long time, it's the people, there's probably not even a huge group of people that actually, talking to when I say the people that have seen me online for the last 4 years. I haven't been online too much for the last, I haven't been online too much for I haven't been, not too many people have stayed online with me for 4 years. There's, a lot of the normal people that were, not really into politics or conspiracies prior to that. They deleted me on some point of the road because they thought that the shit I was saying was too crazy. They thought that I was bullshitting or was racist or whatnot. And that's probably one of the things I'll go back and, I'm hoping that eventually I could take this to the next step, and go to a bigger thing, talk about like Telesur or RT or whatnot. I'm hoping that's the next step for Voice Rebellion Radio. The only thing I worry about is, that kind of stuff is that they'll say that that'll have too much of notoriety prior to that, or the people will try to say that there'll be people from other networks saying that they're higher as a racist or whatnot, and they'll just get rid of me prior to even giving me a chance. They'll just be like, oh, we regret the decision to hire Chris J from Voice Rebellion Radio. Voice Rebellion Radio, by the way, it's definitely taken a turn in the last 2 years or so, but, when it comes to the filter, is that, of course, I don't seem to have the same filter that, for example, my old co-host used to have, and, he believed different things than me, and I say stuff a little bit more, I get right to the chase about a lot of stuff compared to some other people that are here on the alternative media, excuse me, which I think is a good thing, because ultimately a lot of people don't have a very long attention span. A lot of the listeners, a lot of the normal people, and that's the world we live in nowadays. It's not really a testament to people's intelligence per se, but it's a testament to the kind of fast-paced lifestyle we live today. Is that, everything's got to be instant. Everything's got to be in an internet article or whatnot. People don't even read anymore. The idea of reading books, and I'm not going to act like I'm different. I don't read too many books myself. A lot of my reading is done on the internet. And that's kind of a problem. We should be reading books is a great way of obtaining knowledge, and sometimes you can't really say or set the scene well enough in an internet article compared to what you can do in a book. Some of the best pieces of literature are found in books only. I to be honest, it's been a while since I actually read a book cover to back. But like I said, it's important, and when it comes to some historical events, sometimes first person a first person account could take over 200, 300 pages, and that's why you can't rely every single internet articles. But I'll tell you one thing is that even in your alternative media, you have to watch out for those heavily biased sources that ultimately people like the World Socialist website that I used to read a lot, is that ultimately will have you believe in lies about the Bolshevik Revolution. And often the mainstream socialist movement, they discount all conspiracy theories. They try to make it seem like it's all purely, they forget, they don't talk about it. And that's why that you have people on the other side and, the right-wing capitalist type people that they won't mention the Khazars. They won't mention the people that ultimately were at the helm of the Bolshevik Revolution. So ultimately, the people on the other side won't take them seriously. Because they believe that's purely a reflection on the ideology itself of socialism or communism. They don't realize the mistakes of the Soviet Union were based on who was behind it. That was the bankers, the same people behind Wall Street in the United States and behind the Nazis were what turned Soviet Union sour. And that's what, you have people like Jacob Schiff, and, you look at the Soviet government names, and a lot of times you would say, is this the government that was in Moscow or government was in Tel Aviv? You had a lot of, you had a lot of stereotypically Jewish names. 400 out of like 500 government officials being Jewish. And like I said, nothing wrong with being Jewish. However, this extreme predominance in this government is definitely fishy in a country that was, 2% Jewish? And I heard somebody try to tell me that was 3% was the number that it actually was. And that might have been the number it was practicing. Probably almost all of them were not practicing, I believe, but they were by blood. And this is Zionism. This is very typical of Zionism, that they won't actually be practicing Jews, but they believe because of their blood that they're superior. And, who does that sound like? The Nazis. They believe that the Aryans' blood made them superior. Is that ultimately Zionists? And, you look at you look into what they believe. You look into the scriptures that, go into the Talmud and stuff. It's disgusting stuff that they believe Christians and believe, is that a lot of the modern American Christians practically bow down to the Zionists, and they tell you that if you don't support, like people like Chuck Hagee, he tells you that if you don't support Israel, you're going to hell. Well, ultimately, Israel vandalizes churches and they treat Christians as second-class citizens. Is that ultimately, if you're not a white pro-government Jew in Israel, then you're going to be treated lower. And then you have all the way down to your Palestinian Muslims. And, the Palestinian Christians are in the same fight. Is that a lot of the people that live in Palestine are Christian. The numbers went down because a lot of them evacuated. However, Christians are definitely not treated at the same status as Jews in Israel. They're not treated like I think Christians here in America think they're treated. And shame on these, church leaders, these preachers that are preaching, that support Israel and telling people that, that modern Israel and ancient Israel are the same thing. They're not. Biblical Israel and modern Israel, the difference between the Israelite and the Israeli is that ultimately the Israeli government more reflects is what we see in Revelations 2:9, the synagogue of Satan, the false Jews. And it's disturbing. But these are the people that ultimately run the Israeli government. Is that these people could care less about Moses, they could care less about, what the values that their government or that their book teaches them, that the Torah teaches them. Because if you look between the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, the values are pretty similar. But we got to realize that Israel and what ultimately guides their government is really the Talmud, and this is a totally different book. Is that people here in America, and a lot of times the churches here and the more right-wing evangelical churches will tell you that the Quran is bad and Israel is good. But are they going to tell you about the Talmud and what it says about Christians? They're going to tell you that they believe that non-Jews are to be pretty much their servants, or as they call us, the goyim, the cattle. Will they know that? Would they even know what the word goyim is? And ultimately, the Talmud says that, what does it say? That it says that Mary's boiling in semen in hell? This is despicable. This is awful. Is that ultimately, imagine if a Muslim cleric was to say that, like of any major province besides like the Wahhabis were to say that. It would be a massive outrage. But they don't tell you in the Quran, Jesus is the most quoted prophet in the Quran, and he's respected heavily. He's almost right. He's a heavily respected prophet. And I'm not going to go into their specifics of the Quran, but I think there's a lot of hate towards Islam, even in the alternative media. That's it's just wrong, really. Is that there's a lot of people that are excluded outside of the alternative media, ultimately for people that have very similar values, And I'm not going to say Christianity and Islam are the same religion and we should unite as a religion or anything like that. There's people that will try to say that and try to spin my words and try to say, "Oh, he's supporting Chrislam." It's like, no, I'm not doing that. But what I am supporting is that we shouldn't hate on their beliefs, while at the same time supporting the Israelis' beliefs. When the Israeli beliefs are that we're the enemy, us Christians, we're the enemy. Us Americans, the average American, we're the enemy. We're just goyim. And once they use us for what we're worth, what they can get out of us is what I mean. Then we can just, as they said, go, dry up and go to the wind. This is the reality. And when people wake up, and that's what people need to do, they need to wake up. And, I'm not the only one that's saying this. But ultimately, look how it's like, there's one guy that comes to mind is that talked about this for years, Louis Farrakhan, that they tried to make ridiculous. And I don't agree with everything he says, but when it comes to Israel, I think he's told the truth for the most part. And Louis Farrakhan gets all this hate on the media. That's why I called the NRA a nefarious organization, by the fact that they've made their stance clear that they are definitely a group that's opposed to, it seems, really just social activism itself, and they support the Zionist Donald Trump. And, the way that they have characterized Farrakhan, they try to make him seem like he's a domestic terrorist. I think that's an unfair thing to call Louis Farrakhan. Farrakhan's interesting. I don't really particularly support him. But, I got to say, he's definitely entertaining to watch. He's a great entertainer. That's one thing that the conservative, the white, a lot of the almost quasi-white supremacist kids say is that they have entertaining people. They don't have entertaining people. It's pretty painful watching some of these conservative commentators, especially nowadays. You see the people that have joined in to the over to the Trump bandwagon. People like Mark Dice and shit. Mark Dice is one of the most disappointing people to have watched. Watch his descent from somebody that said fuck the system, Democrats or Republicans are the same shit. Now Mark Dice is just a run-of-the-mill conservative commentator. And then Alex Jones, same thing. He's still extreme. He still says some truthful stuff, but at the same time, Mark Dice went straight to everything practically that's wrong in America's blame on liberals. He fell right into the left-right paradigm, and he dragged a lot of his followers with him. Alex Jones, however, is still he still says some truthful things, but it seems to have joined the Trump bandwagon, and he's starting to go down the track of liberals are everything that's wrong with America. Donald Trump, it's crazy the effect that he had on some of the main alternative media hosts, and I respect Jesse Ventura that didn't let even his own personal friendship with Donald Trump cloud his judgment when it came to this man. He seems to has a level head when it comes to talking about Donald Trump. He hasn't 100% jumped on the Trump bandwagon and said stuff that he knows isn't true when it comes to Donald Trump. In order to try to appease his audience or the people, Jesse Ventura at least is staying honest. Mark Dice is saying quasi-racist shit in order to turn into a conservative commentator. I think eventually he's going to be working on Fox News. And I remember one time I actually tried to get him to come on my show about 4 years ago, or when I first was starting on the radio. And Mark Dice pretty much just rejected it. I actually got a response from Mark Dice twice. Nothing. It was just pretty much like, oh, I'll be busy or whatnot. He was one of the people that when I first was on radio, I really wanted to interview, and I actually kind of looked up to him. Mark Dice. I even looked up to Alex Jones at one point, and it's really disappointing to see the track that they've taken. But there's some alternative media people that definitely have stayed the course and still talk pretty truthful about major issues. But it's also sad to see one of the people, top researcher for a lot of the stuff, Jim Marrs, is apparently not in best shape. Apparently he's having a few health issues. He's getting up there in age. Hopefully he pulls through. Jim Marrs was also one of those people when I was first started the radio. Tried to get in touch with, tried to get on my show. Didn't quite work out. I never even got a response from Jim Marrs, but I was also, this was like before I was even, I wouldn't say that like close to as big now, but because I wouldn't say like I made a giant jump to where I am now, but I definitely have grown. I definitely grown my audience. I definitely made Voice Rebellion a bit bigger than it was when I first started 3.5 years ago. It was November of 2013 is when I started Voice Rebellion Radio, and ever since that point, it's that when I first started, it was just an NWO Truth Radio. Then I moved on to Stave Old Radio. Now I'm here at UCY.TV, where I've been here the longest duration of any of my adventures on the radio. By the way, if anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Yeah, talk about the about Bolshevikism. Is that ultimately he was kind of slimy himself. He was a degenerate, but Winston Churchill did mention about Zionism or Bolshevikism, and he mentioned the similarities in 1930 something. It's definitely apparent that when it comes to it, people knew that was there, that this correlation, and to try to hide completely that Zionism and Bolshevikism are two ideologies that are pretty similar to each other would just be naive. It was the usurping of a country from Christian Russia in order to make this new entity of the Soviet Union, which ultimately repressed religion, repressed political dissent, and ultimately made a new oligarchy. Is that people talked about the disparity of wealth in the Tsarist Russia. And we should talk about the disparity of wealth in Bolshevik Russia. In the Soviet Union, there was definitely a disparity of wealth. The Soviet Union had their ruling class. It's like just like many of the Western democracies in quotations. Was these people living in extravagant wealth? People like Stalin, that I can just imagine what kind of wealth this guy lived in. Ultimately, Joseph Stalin's $30 million or 30 million people that he killed. It's a shame that in today's internet, there's still a lot of people that support Joseph Stalin, and people that support that era of the Soviet Union. They try to make it seem like that it was the kulaks only that got killed. It was the people that were, that were hoarding food. But it wasn't that simple. And in fact, some of the people they killed were his old political rivals or political allies, like the old Bolsheviks. People like Trotsky, who he eventually would kill in 1940. So he lasted almost to World War II. It's crazy to think that Trotsky made it that long. He's put into political exile in 1929. But Trotsky was one of the most, from what I've seen, was one of the most sadistic and one of the most horrible Bolsheviks that was there. He led the Red Army, and the Red Army was known for the Red Terror that they committed throughout the 1920s, including during the Civil War, and it eventually led to the death of 4 million Russians. And after the Russian Civil War, that was the last-ditch attempt by the White Russians in order to try to reclaim their country. And the White Russian movement would be unsuccessful in trying to take down the Red Bolsheviks. And the White Russian movement was not just monarchist. It was not just people that were right wing. It was actually socialists that rivaled the Bolsheviks were on that as well. The Bolshevik Revolution was by all means was not exclusive to really any ideology. Again, it was just a foreign-backed force of annexation of an entire country and the bringing down of an empire. And ultimately, they would do similar measures to try to take down the Germans. They ultimately took them down by wearing them out through war, just like they did with the Russians. And then ultimately, they had a revolution in November of 1918 that took down the German Empire. I believe just days before the Armistice Day, which was November 11th, 1918. I think they fell on November 9th, 1918. Ultimately, the Weimar Republic would be the ones that would be the ones that would see the armistice and eventually the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which would become the Treaty of German Humiliation. The German people would suffer through some of the worst hyperinflation that ever happened in human history. In fact, $1 would be equal to 4.3 Deutschmarks in 4.3 Deutschmarks in, I believe, 1921. By 1924, that same Deutschmarks is now worth 1 trillion times less. So now it's 4.3 trillion Deutschmarks, whatever. I don't know what type of marks they called it yet. It was, I believe the Reichsmark, though, was what they called it only in the Nazi era. But then again, Reichsmark could have been used prior to that because Reich, there had been Reichs before that. There was the First Reich, the Second Reich. The Germans were the Second Reich. And, the Nazis were the Third Reich. The Kaiser was the Second Reich, and that had just recently fallen. Which ultimately, I said the Kaiser, he did not seem to be pretty happy with what he did to Russia. In fact, I'll pull up the quote for you. What the Kaiser said about the Bolsheviks. It's like, I wonder, I think in his case, it was a regret compared, I think that he might have been bamboozled compared to like the Woodrow Wilson, who he supposedly showed regret, I think like in 1920. However, I don't think that it was really too regretful. I think his banker buddies might have compensated him handsomely Quote on Bolsheviks. Let's see. I mean, it's kind of a. This is a quote that the Kaiser Wilhelm II had to say. I'm not sure if this is a totally true quote because it looks like this might be a kind of possibly a fascist website. But let's see. The Jews are responsible for Bolshevikism in Russia, in Germany too. I was far too indulgent with them during my reign, and I barely regret the favors I showed to prominent Jewish banks. See, also the Kaiser, had his he was known for being a little bit anti-Jewish, but I think when it comes to the Bolsheviks, you get the point, is that this definitely was a disproportionately Jewish movement. It was not a movement of class struggle, it was a movement of a country being usurped by power from outside. Now, let's see, this is another quote, actually, and this is a sketchy website as well, Smoloko. I'm familiar with them. Let's see. I just wanted to see what he supposedly, I'm not even going to say he said because it came from not the greatest website. Kaiser Wilhelm believed that the Masons were responsible behind World War I. I have been informed that an important role was played in the preparation of the World War directed against the monarchical Central Powers by the policy of the International Great Orient Lodge, a policy extending over many years and always envisaging the goal at which it aimed. In 1917, an international meeting of the lodges of the Great Orient was held, after which there was a subsequent conference in Switzerland. At this, the following program was adopted: dismemberment of Austria-Hungary, democratization of Germany, elimination of the House of Habsburg, abdication of the German Emperor, elimination of the Pope and the Catholic Church, elimination of the state church, elimination of every state church in Europe. Now, I don't know if they would really want to take out the Catholics because they've been in control of the Catholics forever, pretty much. I mean, the Catholic Church is one of the pinnacles of the is one of the pinnacles of the New World Order. It's that ultimately Catholic Church is one of the major things they use to control society for a long time. Is that the perversion of Christianity, the Catholic Church, and one of the major things that shows that is the Pope. Is that we call the people that follow the Catholic Church call the Pope Father. But I believe doesn't it say in the Bible that you can't call anyone Father but God? So, he's not the Pope's cult of personality around him is definitely suspicious, I would say. And also, you just look at the history. People like Cesare Borgia ultimately one of the Pope's sons that they painted the picture of white Jesus that we know of today. Cesare Borgia is a perfect example of the Catholic Church's corruption. Which ultimately, what happened in Germany is that they had an uprising in 1918, but their uprising would be quelled by the right-wing forces like the Freikorps and I think also like the predecessors to the SS, but they were not good either, and they ultimately would end up, totally destroying Germany practically in 1940s. Really, the history of Germany went downhill after that when you think about it, because you had Weimar Republic years, you had Nazi Germany, you had East Germany, West Germany. Now you have the current Germany, where Germany is losing its identity. and people like Merkel are slowly helping Germany be destroyed. It's a shame what's happened in Germany today, and Germany's the people of Germany are going to remain happy because the economy is doing all right. However, they're moving towards a total cultural annihilation by the bankers, and the plan for Europe. That's the plan for Europe. The European Union's next step is now to lose the identity of the countries that are inside the European Union. However, countries are starting to leave. You had Britain leaving, and who's next? Possibly Italy or Spain. I think Spain will be the next country to leave the European Union. And France won't be too long. I think that despite the fact that they voted in Macron and that Marine Le Pen was voted in, or was not voted in, she was the one that was pushing towards the French exit. I think it'll be only a matter of time before France goes to a new towards France before France goes to a new before France becomes sovereign. Actually, I think it might be Italy. I think Italy's going to be. I don't know. Spain, I feel like they're going to try to hold on to for a little bit. However, I don't know. I would say that's a hard decision. I would say Spain because of Podemos. Podemos, it's a good chance that Podemos will rise to the scene next year or so, or next few years or so. Next general election. I mean, they did pretty good in the last election. And there's a big left wing in the country. Unlike a lot of Western Europe, it's kind of an anomaly. The most of Western Europe, they don't have too much of a strong left wing. Europe does, England doesn't. France, they do now. It seems like with Mélenchon and his strong showing in the last election. And actually, what we saw is that when Mélenchon lost in the first round, the second round, a lot of his people went over to vote for Le Pen. And I think again is that the election was rigged for Macron. They tried when it came to centrist voters, they tried to paint Le Pen as extremist. They tried to paint Le Pen as someone that was, and they tried to even push the Russia type stuff. That's another thing that they are going to push. It seems like in every probably Western election now. They'll probably push the next Canadian election even that Russia's involved somehow with a candidate that they don't want to win. The mainstream doesn't want to win. And I'm not saying Trump is an outsider candidate. I think that the whole thing is just create strife and set up a country division and lead up to ultimately maybe potentially violence and a civil war. That would be the wet dream of the elites for this country to descend into violence and descend into chaos where they can bring out the troops and people welcome it. People will be glad that order has been restored. But ultimately, people won't realize the consequences that we've given up our freedoms for safety. And it's like Benjamin Franklin said, that a country that's willing to do that will have or deserve neither. Well, I don't believe we deserve it. I don't believe anyone deserves to lose their liberty, but I do think that we won't have our liberty if we do that. We've already done that. We've been doing that for years, we've been giving up liberties for security. Well, we haven't done it. We are doing it. We haven't, completely descended to the point where we do not have any liberties, but so we're on our way. And like I said, is that, when people say, "Oh, Russia's rebuilding the Soviet Union," we need to fear them. We need to get prepared for the new world war. I tell them, look, we're not. Or I haven't even told them. I think about it. I haven't even brought that argument, but I haven't. That's why I think, is that look, we're more like we're more like the old Soviet Union than Russia is of today. We're the ones that are building the wall, or supposedly going to build a wall. We're the ones that are getting involved in wars that we have no part in. We're the ones that we're involved in Afghanistan now when the old Soviet Union was involved in Afghanistan in 80s, of course, the Soviet Union got involved in Afghanistan and got involved in that war of attrition. Now we're involved in the war of attrition there. I don't think we're actually going to build the wall, but supposedly we're going to. And no, this ain't different this time. You build a wall on your border that makes you, it's restrictive. It's a symbol of a curtailing of liberties. There's no way to really defend it. And it's any wall that I think is erected in modern times like that, what's going to be remembered is the Berlin Wall. By the way, if anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296 here, Voice of Bond Radio. We have 55 minutes left of the show tonight. And we're talking about multiple different, we'll talk about mainly about the Bolsheviks tonight, talk about the Soviet Union, and people, the different people that were involved in the Cold War, Soviet Union. It's that ultimately we had people like Nixon over here on our side that pushed us very close to nuclear war, and we had people that pushed us away, like JFK, who ultimately would be assassinated, and it went against the deep state or the shadow government's plans was to push us away from the Cold War. They wanted us towards total confrontation, and look at also on their side, I think Khrushchev tried to push them away from the Cold War. You had Brezhnev that dove the country deeper and deeper into the Cold War. And Brezhnev, who was there for 18 years, was there during the years of Vietnam. He was there during the years of throughout the 70s, and ultimately he would start the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Looking right now at different things with Brezhnev. I don't know how true this is. By the mid-1970s, there were an estimated 1,000 to 10,000 political and religious prisoners across the Soviet Union living in grievous conditions and suffering from malnutrition. Many of these prisoners were considered by the Soviet state to be mentally unfit. They were hospitalized in mental asylums across the Soviet Union. Under Brezhnev's rule, KGB infiltrated most, if not all, anti-government organizations, which ensured there was little to no opposition against him or his power base. However, Brezhnev refrained from the all-out violence seen under the rule of Stalin. While Stalin was hard to replicate what happened under his years, what happened during his regime. See what else I can find. Brezhnev. What I know, of course, is that Brezhnev was not the biggest ally towards Third World revolutions when it came to Che Guevara, who remember that all the accomplishments that Che Guevara did, that was all in 39 years. And there's different misconceptions about Che Guevara. They tried to, and one of the major things that people love to say is that he was a racist. He did say a quote in his motorcycle diaries where I think he said that he believed black people were unclean. Again, it was an isolated quote. It's that one of the major things I think could debunk the myth that Che Guevara was racist is that all you have to look to is what he did in Cuba. Che Guevara supported a revolution that ultimately would desegregate the country. Don't you think that if he would either not fight in that revolution, or once he won the revolution, he would push segregation would stay as an institution? Che Guevara, I don't think was a supporter of segregation or racism. And when it comes to homophobia, what I have to say is that he was born in the 1920s. Let's remember is that pretty much any leader, any person that was born then is not going to be the biggest supporter of gay rights And often, I find it ironic because it's weird how quickly, like, a lot of these people that talk about Che Guevara and talk about the communists as a whole, they'll try to say, they bring up this thing about LGBT rights, but otherwise they wouldn't really be bringing up LGBT rights. My personal take on gay rights is that I have no problem with gays. I have no problem with them living a life without discrimination and being free to marry. I just don't believe that they should be having gay parades and or definitely not what they, like in Russia. I totally agree with their decision to ban gay parades, especially a country where they have the extreme on the other side that will violence will be induced, and the police will have to break it up. And at the same time, is that they were provocative. There's children around. Children shouldn't have to see that. It really was. We look at the law. It was also partially a law to protect the country from any kind of potential legalization of pedophilia in the future. I guess I believe that's what the law says. It's against homosexual propaganda towards minors and pedophilia. So I don't really see anything this is bigoted. The law in Russia was common sense, and just one more attack on modern day Russia, partially because they're trying to reinstitute a country of values, and they don't like Putin. They don't like Putin for kicking out the Rothschilds, which Vladimir Putin is now, he's done a great job as Russian president, I believe. I think that history will absolve him of, all this criticism that he's gotten on the media, all this. It's funny is that I can't even think the last time he's been on, like he's got an interview on CNN or MSNBC that gave all these different other people interviews, and I think he deserves that. That'd be one way. He speaks English, hearing his own words, what he actually has to say. But people don't care, because even if there was words out of Putin, they wouldn't care because they believe it's all lies because it's out of his mouth. But Vladimir Putin is not the man that they say that he is on the Western media. People need to understand that, and it's really important for the younger generation, because I see a lot of people are joining the military. A lot of people are, even people that have very high GPAs. They have many other routes, but they pick the military, and it shows the brainwashing today. I would never join the military. It's not that I don't love my country. I just believe you could serve in different ways. If you want to serve your country in that way, by a gun and serving with a gun, well, I think the way that you should serve the military then is by being a militia, and you could serve your country to protect the country from the major threats that exist right now, which are domestic threats from our own government. Our own government squishing us, and our own government coming down with martial law and other things to repress our liberties. And that's a major curtailment of our liberties, is that when the martial law comes down, militias will be here to protect us. That's one way of protecting our country. But the military is not a way of protecting our country. You're just doing the bidding of the corporate elite in the New World Order. It's in thinking of a contrast. Someone that actually saw, in Latin America, the horrors of American foreign policy and the help of these monolithic corporations. You have people like Che Guevara, who saw this monolithic corporation, and he saw United Fruit Company, which during his motorcycle trip in 1953, he saw their total domination over over the Guatemala economy. This I guess this swayed him towards his political beliefs, and right around that time, or no, he went to Guatemala, but I think he might have, or no, he was in Costa Rica and saw United Fruit Company. Then went to Guatemala where Jacobo Arbenez was in power, and he saw the government that headed land reform and other initiatives, and they were trying to end the latifundia system. Which of large land holdings were to be expropriated and redistributed to landless peasants. The biggest landowner and one of the most affected by the reforms was the United Fruit Company, from which the Arbenz government had already taken more than 225,000 acres of uncultivated land. Pleased with the road that the nation was heading down, Guevara decided to settle down in Guatemala so as to perfect himself and accomplish whatever may be necessary in order to become a true revolutionary. Which, by the way, Che Guevara wasn't perfect himself in his his beliefs. Is that Che Guevara early on was actually pro-Stalin, but when he found out about the crimes that Stalin had committed, he became a critic of Stalin and the Soviet Union. And in fact, Guevara made a trip to Palestine later on in 1958, I believe. That he was actually a dedicated anti-Zionist, unlike like the Soviet Union's leaders, where Stalin was actually the second leader to support Israel. The United States jumped to the support of Israel very quickly. The Soviet Union was right there, and Soviet Union would support Israel for earlier years, actually, all the way up to 1951 or so, before there was the whole doctor's plot and everything, supposedly, and supposedly that became very critical of Israel. I think under the years of Khrushchev might have been somewhat critical of Israel because of he saw their role in bringing the two superpowers of the world closer to the war, and the fact that the Mossad and their interference in world politics. I think that it'd be hard to ignore as a leader, and that's what Khrushchev was somewhat critical of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev was a bit alarmed of Israel. Israel's role it seems to be destabilizing. It seems to be coups and assassinations of those that oppose them, and even to a certain extent, it's the Soviet Union throughout most of existence. However, despite being an enemy to the United States, they went pretty soft on Israel, and that's something that should be looked at. That even during the latter years, yes, there was apartheid week or whatever, and there was different public statements, but the action wasn't, and the action, the attention definitely wasn't there. It was towards America, towards the American government. And they made it all about, Soviet Union versus America. But ultimately, look who's responsible. Look at the ones that ultimately, if you go back far enough, people that are responsible, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, you trace the money. We ever wonder why the United States has this unlimited amount of money towards military? It's because of the Rothschilds who keep loaning them. They have an unlimited credit card with the Rothschilds. And they funded the different military empires throughout history, Nazi Germany, Britain, Spanish Empire, that's committed so many atrocities that ultimately the Rothschilds tally. People talk about Stalin versus Mao versus Hitler. The ultimate tally that we should be talking about would be the Rothschilds' ultimate tally. which is who knows how many people have been killed by Rothschild-supported governments. It's in the millions or the billions, possibly. It's in the hundreds of millions, probably. And like I said on the show last week, I don't believe that socialism as a whole, that is what's responsible for these deaths in these different countries there in the Soviet Union. I'm going to talk too much about Mao's China today because I'm really just talking about Bolshevikism. But when it comes to the many deaths, maybe upwards of 100 million between the Soviet Union, China, and a few other regimes, it's mainly, I think it's the West poisoning these different countries' governments, and ultimately Zionism finding its way into the governments. When it came to the Soviet Union, that was definitely the case. It was the predecessors to the Zionists in Israel. It was kind of like, it really, if you look at it, the Federal Reserve was the annexation of America by the Zionist New World Order. Russia would be annexed by the Bolsheviks in 1917. And then what was next was Israel itself. And I think you look at around the same year, I think it was 1947 there, 1948 was China. And China actually would be taken over by Mao. And you look at the different faces in the Mao regime, some of them actually happen to be like European Jews. It's actually a pretty bizarre coincidence, I guess you could say. Or maybe it wasn't a coincidence. It's that the fact that they have these people that, I think there was like one guy was like Warburg, different people that have been in the party for practically the entire existence that were not even Chinese. Of course, the sources are, again, this is kind of a sketchy source for, I don't know if it's all fake, but I looked it up, and at least one of these guys is real, that he was actually in the Chinese government. The source is super sketchy, Radio Islam, because it's pretty much a fashy website that I think might be trying to be it's trying to pose for Islamic people, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if they're supporters of Islam, or the guy's he's supposedly like a Swedish neo-Nazi or something like that. That's also, I don't know if he's also a Muslim. I don't know. But this is what I found on the website. Israel Epstein being one of the people that was close to Mao. Robert Kuhn. Looking at who else you had here? Sidney Shapiro. And Chen Beatty. Sidney Rittenberg, another person in his regime. Talk about Mao right now. Virginius Frank Coe. Rawi Ali. Let's see. I think I looked up this guy. I don't think this guy was actually real. Or was not involved with China. George Sokolowski. And it says, anyways, I think it said, the funny thing is that some people, they try to point to McCarthy, and they say that Joseph McCarthy was actually trying to stop what was going on today. I think it was just another stooge in the whole stage that Washington, D.C. is. But I do find it odd that Mao was willing to meet with Kissinger, of all people, rather than meet with like JFK or anything like that, who was definitely more tolerant and definitely was trying to ease the tensions between the West and East. However, he met with Kissinger, the warmonger that overthrew Allende in Chile. And Israel Epstein was still there even up to the days of was Hu Jintao, who was like the last premier prior to the Xi Jinping taking over. It's somewhat dubious, but definitely there's definitely been some odd occurrences inside the Mao government. And look what happened to Mao's, that 45 million people would ultimately be killed by the Maoist regime. Ultimately, the one thing you could say you can blame on all of this is that what ultimately weakened the people, where they could be slaughtered off, and this wholesale slaughter by the government was gun control. And you see in every practically dictatorial regime, this is something that they tried to introduce, is that they introduced it in China, they introduced it in Stalin's Russia, they introduced it in Germany, Nazi Germany, and ultimately gun control is it's a tactic of control. And, you know, people try to make it seem like was Trump in presidency, we're out of the woods. I don't believe that. In fact, his own personal beliefs are shown before that Trump is not really a fan of guns. I believe in his book where he tries to outline like his dream of America, he said he would ban automatic weapons. So Trump is not the biggest gun supporter that imaginable. And in fact, I'm going to look it up right now. Or actually, one more thing I think I wanted to look up, but looking at more of the Chinese Zionist connection, and they're talking. Right now, it seems that there's this kind of dubious relationship with China and Israel. In fact, China hasn't really taken a super strong stance against Israel. There's apparently been at some points where they were opposed to Zionism or opposed to the settlements, but this is from a newspaper, the Mosaic magazine. I don't know how credible at all if this magazine is, but it says, moreover, China appears friendly to the Jewish state. The two have employed robust diplomatic and economic relations for over 2 decades. China is Israel's third largest trading partner, volume increasing, but practically everyone trades to China, with volume increasing from 50 million in 1992 to over 10 billion in 2013. At least 1,000 Israeli firms now operate in the PRC, and China is the second leading source of joint high-tech ventures with Israel's Office of Chief Scientist. The two countries have a thriving scientific exchange program. Of greater strategic consequence is Israel's role in the One Belt, One Road initiative, a network of land and sea infrastructure projects stretching from China to Europe and designed to expand Beijing's geopolitical and economic influence. In 2014, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fast-tracked the approval of the Red Med project, a Chinese-funded high-speed rail line that, by connecting Eilat on the Red Sea to the port of Ashdod on the Mediterranean, will provide an alternative to the Suez Canal as a shipping route. The project is a second iteration of a high-speed rail project that Netanyahu first proposed as finance minister in 2003. Further increasing its influence in the sector of Israeli infrastructure, China has also won a bid to build the future Ashdod port and a license to operate a new deep-sea port in Haifa. Finally, China has assumed an increasingly prominent role in the larger Middle East. Israel's immediate neighborhood, it is a large importer of energy from the Persian Gulf states, and as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, it enjoys automatic geopolitical leverage in the region. And going back at the source, doesn't seem like fashy or anything like that, or even like really political bias. Just not sure, how real the source is. It seems like a low level, kind of striving magazine. And I'm going to pick this one off because this is from YNet, which I believe is one of Israel's like top newspapers. So let's see what they have to say about the Israeli-Chinese relationship. In fact, this is, I believe, one of the more hardcore Israeli newspapers, if I'm not mistaken. But let's see. Meet Benjamin Peng, a Chinese Zionist businessman. A chance occurrence 6 years ago made businessman Benjamin Peng change his attitude towards Israel and tied his fate to it. He went on to found the investment firm Yafo Capital, which connects Chinese investors with startup companies. Over 100 Chinese businessmen arrived in Israel to take part in the Go for Israel conference. His goal was to encourage investments and cooperation between Israeli investors and those from emerging markets. The conference, organized by the Kuckerman Investment House and the private equity fund Catalyst, was attended, among others, by a dynamic young businessman named Benjamin Peng. Peng walked the halls of Tel Aviv Hilton wearing a yarmulke and a smile. I'm a Chinese Zionist, he declared without blinking. For years, Peng didn't especially like Israel, he tells us, but a chance meeting with 3 Israeli women who were on a post-IDF service trip abroad changed his attitude. 5 years ago, he decided to become a Christian, a move that brought him even closer to Israel. Later, he changed his name to Benjamin. 3 years ago, Peng came to Israel for the first time and has visited 7 times and established a Chinese investment firm, Yafo Capital. Yafo is the Hebrew name of the city of Jaffa. Along with 2 Chinese partners, he even proposed to his girlfriend at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. I founded Yafo Capital with my 2 partners, Jing Jiang, who later took the name Bose, and Sean Jing. Investment firm sits in Shanghai and aims to invest Israeli technologies and connect Chinese investors with startups. Jaffa is a historical place, and its name an important link abroad. Jaffa will become an attraction for Chinese people worldwide in the future, he says. Even before I founded Yafo Capital as an advisor to Chinese investors doing deals with Israeli companies, I suggested that my partners who didn't know Israel should visit it. They visited and found Israel to be a fascinating place. Okay, let's not see this article goes on and on for a while, but it seems to be more the story of an individual man rather than the state of the country altogether. Which I don't know if they're trying to. I can't even tell if he's really a supporter. Or I mean, if the country itself is more supportive of Israel or not. I think at least by the official line, they don't seem to be too supportive of Israel because of their support for Syria and Iran, also in the Middle East. But at the same time, I think they've never had really too much of a strong rancor for Israel, and especially earlier on. I think that China's China was the amount of certain presence in their government. They might have not had the strongest. I wouldn't even say that's really related, but I think that earlier on they did not have too much of an opinion when it came to Israel. Now that's been more formed, and like I said earlier, it's that with the Khazars. I talk about like who ultimately are the people that controlled the Soviet Union. Is that you had these Khazarian Jews that ultimately were there. 85% of their government was Jewish, and they're probably all Khazars, European Jews. But here's what I have to say about that, and I wouldn't even. And who knows? There might actually some might have been actually Semitic, but still Khazarian. I won't even say this. It's the Khaz. All Khazar Jews. People from European Jewish descent are bad. What else, but ultimately, whatever you call it, the Zionists, the Tel Aviv gang, or you call it the, you can even call it the, I don't know, the phony Jews. I don't know. It's because that's ultimately who the Zionists. It's the people at the top. That's who we're talking about. This is the people that are causing havoc. That they call themselves Jews, but they don't practice the religion. They practice the religion of money. These people worship money. They worship power, and they don't follow. They could care less about Moses. They could care less about the average Jewish person. Nazis, they funded. You have people like the Strasser brothers. You have people like that. We have people that across the board, might have been Jewish, but they supported the Nazis because that was the plan for the New World Order. That was how they were going to bring it about. And even here, the word New Order, it was a new order of 10,000 years. And I think that was the 10,000 years because they had been trying for thousands of years. So they figured that they should be around 10,000 years once they get the power. This goes back way before the Rothschilds. This goes way before the British Empire. This goes to the Egypt, the Greek times. This is a plan that's thousands of years in the making. It's not something brand new. And once people understand that this is the intense planning that this has had, then people will finally be able to understand be able to understand how big of a scope this is, and the amount of impact they've had on world history. And when it comes to Israel, when it comes to ultimate Zionism itself, it's that you talk about it, you can't. It's funny how it's the one country you can't talk about. You can mention stuff about England, you can mention stuff about Russia, of course, but you start mentioning about Israel, people start calling you anti-Semitic, and they start to run that buzzword around them. And ultimately, it's an ad hominem attack. It doesn't mean anything. Because, again, most Israelis are not Semitic. They are Khazarian. So they are from Europe. The Semitic people are the Palestinians. The only ones that are being anti-Semitic in Palestine are the Israelis. The Palestinian people, are the Semitic people, and they're being slaughtered. They're being walled in. They're not even being allowed water by the Israeli government. The Israeli government also is practically behind they're behind a lot of the reason why we have the relationship with Israel we do is because they have the Israeli government. They lobby. People understood that, and people understood how much they lobby. It's disgusting. And a lot of times they also, they take them on propaganda towards Israel. They take freshman congressmen and they show them a distorted version of Israel, and they were trying to make it seem like it's this accepting, peaceful place, but really it's a heavily militarized fascist state that is anti-democratic. And they don't even try nowadays. They call themselves purely a Jewish state because they don't even care about trying to act like they're different, that there actually are a country that truly believes in democracy. They just want, nowadays they just make it open that they're just purely about the ethnic superiority of their own people. And it's not even Jewish people altogether, like Black Jewish or even like Mexican Jewish or anything like that. It's white Jewish, European Jewish. The giant colonial project is what we have witnessed inside of Israel. It's ultimately a country that excludes a lot of people, and I wouldn't want to live there, so I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining that I can't go there. It's like that's not a country I'd want to live in, and wouldn't not want to give my money to them. And that's why it's important that we try to boycott their products. And I truly believe in the boycott, divestment of, and sanctioning of Israel. BDS, which is not BDSM, that's a unrelated topic, but BDS, which is 729, 871. Remember those codes. Drill that into your head when you are going grocery shopping next time. 729, 871. Because they were using 729 for a long time. However, I believe that people started to catch on to the 729 when the whole BDS thing started. That was the first three numbers on the barcode showing the country that's made. So they started switching 871 to try to disguise that. However, that's like their new barcode, so watch out for that. There's a lot of products that are have an Israeli attachment to them, and unlike what they try to say, and I know another thing that they love to do is try to make it seem like our total existence, our entire modern world, we owe to Israel. No, that's not the case. They're not these geniuses that have created everything. That ultimately, if you want to put credit on one person or one entity for the modern world, like a mortal person, Nikola Tesla is that guy. Give the credit to that guy, even though your textbooks didn't mention him, which is an absolute shame that Nikola Tesla is not mentioned in our textbooks. An inventor that did not care about the profit that he got. He was the person that's ultimately pretty much responsible for the modern world that we live in, inventor of AC currency, inventor of many great things, and died pretty much penniless despite all his contributions to the civilization that we live in today. But no, Israel, I've seen what they do to try to say, oh, if you enjoy using a computer, if you enjoy this or this and that, no, it's like ultimately what Israel has brought today is a lot of propaganda to our news. They've brought a lot of division in our country. There's nothing, it's people will say, oh, you're just going too far, blaming on everything. Ultimately, it's hard not to find stuff to blame them on. Their role when it comes to lobbying our government, when it comes to distorting our news, you notice that it's always the same experts that go to with the Israeli-Palestine situation, and always the same scripts that they follow. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestine situation, you know what I mean? Is that it's always the same. Same answers. It's always, oh, it was a mistake. Oh, it was a misfire. Oh, we didn't mean to bomb that killed a kindergarten school with the kindergarten school with a rehab for kittens in the back side of the school. Now, obviously, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's like every time you think that Israel's a barbaric nation, war can't be topped. Oh, wait, there's more. Dude, just imagine that in the Billy Mays voice or whatever. It's sad, but at the same time, it's slightly funny. Yeah? It's like war crimes, genocide, denying of basic human supplies. And it's like, but wait, there's more. If you support Israel now, you'll be allowing them to do this and this and this. It's like, but only a one-time offer at 1-800. It's like 1-800. Be a good goy. Be a good goy. 729. Yeah, because 729 the barcode. It's not good to laugh about, but it's at the same time gotta put a little bit of humor into their show, because I know their show's been pretty stern and serious, and I didn't do a lot of my usual humor. It's some of my I know some of my other shows. I've done the accents and done the different impressions. The last show, I did my Little Alex Jones impression. If you didn't catch the last one, which was, is that my first show? doing live now. I did what was that, July? Was it July 2nd? Was it July 1st? July 1st, or no, July 2nd. I went on the air and did that show. That was the first time I did live since like May 22nd. I went a long time with, like 5 weeks actually without doing a single show live. And when I finally came back to doing live shows after a while, it felt kind of weird actually being back for a live one. But going back to what I was talking about earlier is that going back to what I was talking about earlier, that about the main topic, Zionist and the Bolshevik government, and ultimately also Stalin actually set up the Jewish Autonomous Oblast in Siberia, which at one point was actually something like 30% Jewish. It's actually, I guess you could say, is like I said, the Soviet Union's kind of predecessor to the state of Israel. And what they did to the Soviet Union would be similar to what would happen to Palestine in a few decades later. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast was a kind of, this is somewhat of a homeland for Jews, I guess you could say, prior to that. But right now, actually, it's only 2.2% of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast practice Judaism right now, and it's actually the only autonomous oblast. And it says, aside from Israel, it's the only official Jewish territory. Nowadays, they have a population of 176,558. It actually still exists. Nowadays, it's like almost pure Russian. So it's actually not really a Jewish region. It's like 3 schools in the region still teach Yiddish. I think a lot more used to speak Yiddish back in the day. It's way in the Far East. It's actually by the border. It's on the border with China, by the Manchuria region. It's almost by Vladivostok, actually. It's for the federal district. It's in the far eastern area. So it was the first Jewish territory that was officially established. When it was established in 1934. It's actually ranked. Let's say it's ranked one of the. It's one of the smallest oblasts in Russia. It's pretty small. But at the same time, the symbolic nature of it was definitely something for sure, I guess you could say. See what eventually led to it. The Soviets also said supposedly they wanted to offer an alternative to Zionism, the establishment of Palestine as a Jewish homeland. Socialist Zionists such as Berer, Gorbachev were gaining followers, and at that time, Zionism was a rival ideology to Marxism and left-wing Jews. In 1924, the employment rate amongst Jews exceeded 30%, partially as a result of the pogroms, but also the result of communism, which prohibited people from being craftsmen and small businessmen. With the goal of getting Jews back to work to be more productive members of society, the government established Komzet, the Committee for the Agricultural Settlement of Jews. Original plan was to settle the Jews in Ukraine and Crimea. 2 Jewish districts were formed in Crimea and 3 in South Ukraine. However, an alternative scheme, perceived as the more advantageous, was put into practice. Birobidzhan, which is now the JAO, was chosen by the Soviet elite as the site for the Jewish region. The choice for this area was a surprise to the Komzet. The area had been chosen for military and economic reasons. This was area was once infiltrated by China, while Japan also wanted Russia to lose the provinces of the Soviet Far East. At the time, there were only 30,000 inhabitants in the area, mostly descendants of the Trans-Baikal Cossacks planted there by Tsarist authorities. Koreans, Kazakhs, and Tungusic peoples, a primitive people of tribes. The Russian government wanted to increase settlement in the remote Soviet Far East, especially along the vulnerable border with China. Let's see, let's skip to the 1934. On May 7, 1934, the Presidium of the General Executive Committee accepted the decree on transformation into the Jewish Autonomous Region within the Russian Federation. In 1938, the formation of the Karabakh territory, the Jewish Autonomous Region, was included in its structure. By the 1930s, a massive propaganda campaign developed to induce more Jewish settlers to move there. The campaign partly incorporated the standard propaganda tools of the era and included posters in Yiddish language, novels describing a socialist utopia there. 1936, only 2 years after the JO was found, Stalin supposedly targeted Jews living in the JO and purges. The Jewish population reached a pre-war peak of 20,000 in 1937. According to 1939 census, almost 18,000 Jews lived there, 16% of the total population. After the war ended in 1945, there was renewed interest in the idea of that area for a potential home of the Jewish refugees. Jewish population in the region peaked at around 46,000 to 50,000 Jews in 1948, around 25% of the total region. However, in 1948, Stalin's anti-Jewish purges made living there unappealing. Jews no longer wanted to get jobs or attend graduate school. Stalin died in 1953. And then it started declined by 50%, the Jewish population by 1959. The synagogue opened at the end of World War II, but closed in the mid-1960s after a fire left severely damaged. In 1980, Yiddish school. 1980, a Yiddish school was opened in Bulgaria, and then it went down all the way to less than 9,000 Jews by the end of the Soviet years. 1989. Nowadays, still, there's still a history. There's still like leftovers of the old days where there was a lot bigger Jewish population, but nowadays it's down to 0.4% of the country is Jewish, of the region. So it's definitely not the same region it was back in the day. But then again, like I said, the Jews as a whole are not responsible for the years what happened with the Soviet government. It's not the Jewish people are not all collaborating with the top, with the Zionists or whatnot. It's that ultimately most of the people of most people are against it, and I'm going to say ultimately I think the greatest the one way that I think I got the best attention grabber. Now I was thinking of another word to replace. You got your Zionists, the Tel Aviv gang. How about the Synagogue of Satan? Because that's if you say that, Americans might be willing to look into the Bible and they'll find that, and then maybe they'll apply with a little bit of critical thinking. Hey, it's like, doesn't it sound like that? Doesn't it sound like that certain country in the Middle East that is supposedly a Jewish state, but they seem to be always provoking shit, starting wars, and they're always it's maybe with a little bit of critical thinking they could put that together. Israel, Synagogue of Satan. Oh wait, that's them. I don't know. It's a little bit of wishful thinking, but at the same time, you gotta do what we gotta do, and people hopefully will look into the Bolsheviks. I think that's one that people would be willing to look into, because they already have. The people know. That's the thing, is that people here in America, they believe that communism, or in Russia, I guess you could say, the Soviet communism, Soviet way of communism was bad. But they believe it was bad because of communism, not because of who was behind it, who was the ones that backed it. Now, if they realized who were the Soviet communists, who were the Bolsheviks, then maybe, just maybe, we would have a consciousness of what happened there, and then people would also may apply to what's happening here in America, because ultimately, I guess, like some people say, we're becoming the USSA. We're becoming a country where our civil liberties are being curtailed. We're under mass surveillance. Our government doesn't trust its own people. And we're involved in Afghanistan now. We have this massive government, this oversized central bureaucracy like the Soviet Union had. And at the same time, we have also prison camps that are being built. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, there's up to 800 of these FEMA camps that have been built across the country, and looks like they're ready for use at any time in the future. I definitely believe that whether it's by the sources I've seen, at least, these 800 camps or whatever number there are being opened. And hopefully hopefully it's not true. Hopefully we're not going to have to see that, but I believe we're going to have to see that when martial law is declared, and which I think is not too far away. I think we're going to be seeing World War III not too far from now, and from the sources I've seen, martial law is not too far from now. Benjamin Netanyahu predicted that America would be attacked in 3 to 4 years in 2013. Now it's been 4 years. So it's like we're on the further edge of that 4 years. I don't think it'll be too far until we see another false flag. And Dick Cheney also prognosticated another event. He prognosticated 9/11. If y'all remember, he was the one that he said in spring of 2001 that he think that the United States was going to be attacked. So I would not be surprised if the United States got attacked again. He said New York would be attacked. He was specific. Benjamin Netanyahu was specific. So Netanyahu's, he said that, I think it was 2013, it was like the summer, I think, of 2013 as well. So we're on like that further part of that 4 years. It's like we're about reaching 4 years. So I think that by the end of this year or so, I could highly expect some kind of false flag to go down. I'm actually surprised that it's taken up to this point. I remember back in 2013 when everybody thought that World War III was about to happen, and luckily Putin was able to ink that chemical weapons deal between him and the Syrians, and they were able to remove the chemical weapons, but then they accused him of not moving fast enough. Assad accused him of not moving fast enough. It actually almost all fell apart, but ultimately it delayed going into Syria by about 4 years. Luckily, he was able to ink that deal. But thanks everyone for tuning in. We're nearing the end of the show. By the way, I did do a podcast this week on my Facebook channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, definitely subscribe now. Voice Rebellion Radio with Chris J. It's on Facebook. Subscribe. Don't friend request. I'm not really accepting friend requests right now, but
it's the point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, that commented, kill the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return. And if I
The Anti-Media Radio, your host Nick Bernabe here on UCY.TV.